title of this morning's reflection is Mindfulness and Compassion, the Buddha's Way. Mindfulness and Compassion, the Buddha's Way. And I'm sure some of you are saying, mindfulness, ayo, I keep hearing about this mindfulness. Actually, when I was here in November, December 2019, before the pandemic, one morning, one of the talks I mentioned that in the Buddha's time, he didn't advertise like today, you know. Like next Sunday, we're going to talk about this title, you know, next Friday, this title, blah, blah, blah. Because that's the nature of our modern world. And I said, I would rather just say a Dhamma talk or Dhamma reflection. But a lot of people are always saying, you know, what's the topic? What's the topic? What's the topic? It's like a movie, right? What movie are you playing next Friday? It's like an entertainment. Because as you know, we have so much entertainment these days, right? On TV, YouTube, and so on. Because when I grew up in a rural tropical island, going to a movie, a natural cinema, was a very rare treat, a very rare treat. Of course, we didn't have TV, of course, no internet. And whenever I got to see a movie, when I would go back to school on Monday morning, Monday, Tuesday, I would tell all my friends in school, because, you know, the families were too poor to go to a movie. And I would tell them the movie, the entire movie from start to finish. Because I grew up in a storytelling culture, you know, the way human beings used to do for thousands and thousands of years. Can you imagine? Before television. See, television destroyed a very, very ancient tradition of storytelling, because that's what people used to do at night. They told stories, jokes, they sang songs, and if there was no electricity, you know, they would, around lamps, oil lamps, candles, sometimes a bonfire, and sometimes they would dance, huh? They would get up and dance also. Now, mindfulness and compassion regarding the Buddha's way is also including wisdom. Wisdom and mindfulness, because they go together. And that's what the main quality of the Buddha when you reflect on his life. You can see this, mindfulness and wisdom. And his other quality was loving kindness and compassion. And apparently he did not separate loving kindness and compassion, you know, metta karuna. He didn't really separate them. He always said metta karuna, according to the records. But I'm not surprised, because they go together. Because if you have metta, you have loving kindness, you naturally have compassion. And when you have compassion, naturally, you have sympathetic joy, you know, mudita, which, as I said yesterday, is a great virtue. The ability to share the happiness and good fortune of others, instead of comparing yourself to those people and having envy and jealousy, which is, of course, a mental defilement, mental conflict. But when you have mudita, sympathetic joy, the ego, the self, is not in operation. And this is why you can share in the good fortune and happiness of others. because there's no ego to feel jealous or envious. Great freedom and virtue. Likewise, the virtue of loving kindness and compassion. Because the ego, the self, is not in operation. And the third quality of the Buddha is simplicity and renunciation. Simplicity and renunciation. And what is interesting is that when we look at our human mental defilements, you see that there's a very interesting connection, very interesting relationship. And our human defilements are, as you know, our main one is ignorance and delusion. Ignorance and delusion. And ignorance is specifically pertaining to our strong attachment to self, to have a strong self-view. As we explained yesterday, we do have a self. But when we investigate the mind, we see that the self is only a conditioning in the mind. It's not something permanent, not something which is separate from nature, from society, from the world at large. It's not something which is independent, independent from the rest of, from society, from nature. And delusion, as you know, is something that our minds are constantly being subjected to. But most of the time we're not aware of it. Unless you suddenly get angry, or worried, or nervous, anxious. Then we can see the dukkha, the mental emotional suffering that comes from that delusion. And out of this mental conditioning comes self-centered craving and attachment. Self-centered craving and clinging. And from this ignorance and delusion comes our aversion, hatred and ill will, all our mental, negative mental states, which I've said before includes, hatred, jealousy, resentment, disrespect, and so on, ill will, and so on. So when we look at the Buddha's qualities and we look at our human defilements, we begin to see the connection, the relationship. And this is a wonderful reflection. And you can do it all, on a regular basis, because it really brings you to the heart of the Dhamma and Dhamma practice, and why we practice the Dhamma. We see that wisdom and mindfulness is the medicine, the antidote for ignorance and delusion. Wisdom and mindfulness is the medicine, the antidote for ignorance and delusion. Wisdom, right understanding, right view, overcomes ignorance. And mindfulness is the medicine, the antidote for delusion, or many kinds of delusion. And we see that simplicity and renunciation is the medicine, the antidote for self-centered craving and attachment, clinging. Simplicity overcomes craving, desire, wanting, expectation, greed, of course. And renunciation is the antidote, the medicine for clinging, attachment, and attachment. Very interesting relationship. And of course, we see that loving kindness and compassion is the medicine, the antidote for our, aversion and ill will. It's a very good reflection. And the more our understanding deepens, we begin to realize that we also have Buddha nature. We have Buddha nature. We all have Buddha nature, which is awareness, sensual, present moment awareness and knowing. That is Buddha nature. So even though the historic Buddha passed away, over 2,500 years ago, the Buddha nature is still alive in us. And of course in the Dhamma. This is why before the Buddha passed away, and the monks and lay devotees who were not enlightened or they did not have sufficient wisdom pleaded with the Buddha in great sadness. They pleaded with him not to die, not to leave them. How can we manage without you? The usual attachment, right? Emotional attachment. And the Buddha reminded them, have I not been teaching you the truth of impermanence? That everything has to change, even those that you love, and including all the material possessions that you're very attached to. It all has to change. But then they said, how can we manage, with your great wisdom? Not only your presence, but your great teaching, the Dhamma. And the Buddha reminded them, you must be a light unto yourself. You must be an island unto yourself. And some of them had forgotten, or they hadn't realized the teaching. And then he reminded them, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. If you follow the 4 foundations of mindfulness, that is your true refuge. As long as you're alive, that is your true refuge. You cannot just depend on one teacher, because all teachers are impermanent. They can only live for so long. But the Dhamma is there. He said, when you see the Buddha, you see the Dhamma. When you see the Dhamma, you see the Buddha. It's very true. Not only do you see the historic Buddha, you remember him with gratitude, but you realize through practice that is the Buddha nature that we all have, the awareness, the knowing that can understand the Dhamma. When you see the Buddha or when you see the Dhamma, you see the Buddha. That is what he's pointing to. And interestingly, the Buddha did not, when he began to teach the Dhamma, It wasn't like he was teaching some new philosophy, some new doctrine that he had created. But rather, he was awakened to the truth of Dhamma. You see the difference? He was awakened to the truth of Dhamma. And you always remember the word Buddha means the one who is awakened. He was awakened to the truth of Dhamma, the way things are, the truth of reality, which includes the human condition, right? The human experience. Human problems, human challenges, and dukkha. So even if the Buddha, the historic Buddha, had not existed, the Dhamma would still exist, and the Dhamma is still existing, as long as they're human beings. And when we have the time to really be present, and I'm sure all of you had that experience during the pandemic, where you had to practice this very challenging practice, but it's very worthwhile, namely patient endurance and acceptance. Patient endurance and acceptance. It's a very challenging practice, but it is worthwhile in the end. You begin to come to terms with one basic aloneness. Not loneliness, but aloneness. Because we are alone, whether we like it or not. It's just a natural fact. Even if you're living with people, or you have a marriage partner, you're still alone. As they say, when you're hungry, nobody can eat for you, right? When you're tired, nobody can rest for you. When you have to go to the washroom, nobody can go for you. Even if a good friend offered to do that. You sit there, I will do it for you, because I'm so kind. Right? It doesn't work that way. So I hope you're able to have that understanding, that natural fact of aloneness. And when we understand it, which comes, of course, with mindfulness, with calmness, a stable, balanced, clear state of mind, then we can enjoy our own company. We don't need other people all the time for company. But these days, of course, in a way you have the advantage, because there's also always internet, right? Radio, TV, books, and of course WhatsApp. But that's only if your smartphone is working. But if it's not working, or you have a power failure, then you can't use TV or internet. And in Sri Lanka, I had to be patient with the power cuts. And not just 1 hour or 2 hours. Sometimes there were like 5, 6 hours. No power. So I had no choice but to practice, again, patient endurance and acceptance, just not having power. And you can imagine what people in Malaysia and Singapore, how they managed before electricity was invented in this climate. You remember the hand fan? That's right. And the Chinese used to have these beautiful hand fans. I'm curious, when was the last time any of you ever used a hand fan? Right? So in a way you're fortunate, but at the same time too, you've been very pampered. You've been very pampered. Now delusion, as you said, is something that we're constantly being subjected to. Simply because we're conditioned to react. We're conditioned to react all the time. And our brains, our minds have been educated, programmed to label, judge, criticize, compare, condemn, right? To like, not to like, to want, not to want, to have aversion, of course, ill will. And initially we don't see this as delusion. And we don't realize that we're conditioned, we've been programmed to react. We don't see it as normal behavior, right? But it's a source of delusion. Especially when, we get angry, upset, afraid, anxious, and so on. Then you can see it. Or somebody criticizes you, or say unpleasant things, and you get upset or angry, then you can see it. You can see the delusion, the upset. And for some people, initially, they don't realize that they are being deluded, right? Because we tend to just react to that person's anger or unpleasantness, and we get angry at them also. So then both of you are deluded. You're acting out of delusion. But when we begin to be more mindful, we begin to see this. That our reactions, our conditioned reactions, often make us deluded and suffered. Now, we do need labels to communicate, that's obvious. As you said earlier, including our social labels, I, you, he, she, and our names. But as I mentioned earlier, names are really just social labels. They're not really who we are. And I know in North America, people become very attached to their names. They identify very strongly with their names. So if you happen to call them by a wrong name by mistake, or you forget their names, it's big drama. Just like if you forget somebody's birthday, big drama. And we don't realize that birthdays are really just it's a conditioned behavior. And this is why the Buddha, one of the teachings of the Buddha, was not only finding a cure for sickness, aging, and death, but he also found a cure for birth. Maybe later I'll share this reflection with you. It's very profound. And of course, initially it's very mystifying. How can the Buddha find a cure for birth? And how can he find a cure for sickness, aging, and death? Because as you know, his physical form had to experience sickness, aging, and death, right? So the cure he found was a mental, psychological cure. based on his profound insight into no self, empty of self, no self, anatta. Very profound. But when you reflect on it, with calmness, then you understand this profound insight and reflection. And it's very liberating. Another source of delusion, apart from our habitual reactions, is by the mind itself, what the mind creates. Because as you know, the mind is always creating stories, right? Countless stories and mini dramas, worries and fears, soap operas, like the Korean and the Hong Kong programs that you're watching now. Yeah, I heard that the Korean ones are very popular now, right? The dramas, yeah, they're very popular. The mind is like that. And most of our fears and worries are an aspect of delusion, mental delusion, from thinking itself, and the power of the imagination, right? Because you can worry and you can imagine so many things. This might happen, that might happen, what if, what if this, what if that. But it's mental delusion. But fortunately, with mindfulness, reflection, we can overcome this delusion. But it's very strong, very strong. And we said yesterday, our conditioned habit, that conditioned fear of ghosts and spirits, right? From childhood, it's a very strong conditioning. And again, it's the power of the imagination, isn't it? Because it's all in the imagination. Because I grew up also in the Caribbean, the West Indies, with ghosts and spirits. The only difference is that I was conditioned with African ghosts and spirits. So this is why I'm not afraid of the Chinese ghosts and spirits. And one of the things I like to do when I'm in Malaysia, Singapore, is to invite people to come and do the cemetery meditation. I've never done one in KL, but I managed to do one in Penang. Simply because this center called Bodhi Heart Sanctuary, some of you may know it, is located right in the middle of a cemetery. So when I first went there, I think it was 2008, and it was a fairly new center at that time. I was so happy to see all those graves. Because the first thing that came into my mind was, yes, we have to do a cemetery meditation. Because the graves are there. How convenient. Right? We don't have to go to a cemetery. It's already there. And I was able to inspire, I think, 12 people. But it wasn't successful. Mainly due to the rain. We got rained out, as they say, or rained on. But we tried to stay as long as possible. And I kept telling the people, don't worry, it will go away. The rain will go away, no problem. And for the first time, it did go away for about 5 minutes. Then the rain came back, and I said, don't worry, it will go away. But the second time when it came, it did not go away. So we were getting wetter and wetter, and I think, yeah, let's go inside. So in the end, the ghosts were actually laughing at us. These silly people sitting in the rain, what are they trying to prove? But in Singapore, we were more successful. because the center where I was staying, they were very organized, and they encouraged their members that this is your great opportunity. This Bhante has come from Canada and he's offering this opportunity to overcome this childhood fear of ghosts and spirits. This is your one chance. You must take the opportunity. And it was very successful. I think we did 2 or 3 cemeteries. And, we rented a bus, very organized. And at the end, people were very inspired, very happy that they were able to overcome this fear. Because initially you can't imagine, right? But I must say the cemeteries in Singapore are not spooky, they're not really scary, it's very clean, very organized. I think the cemeteries in Singapore, in Malaysia, are much more scary, right? And some of the cemeteries in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, they are really spooky. But still, if you have this fear, whether a cemetery is spooky or not, the fear is still there, right? The imagination is still there. But again, it does take awareness, mindfulness, to overcome this fear. And I remember one of the participants was a young lady from Indonesia. Because, you have a lot of Indonesians working in Singapore, and they also study in Singapore. So I told people, you sit here, you sit here, you sit there. And some of them, of course, wanted to sit together, right? I said, no, that's cheating. You have to sit at least 10 meters or 10 yards away from each other. And, each grave has a photo, right? Photo of the deceased. So I told this one young lady, you sit here. And she looked at the photo, and she was really nervous. And she said, Bhante, are you really sure about this? I said, don't worry. The ghost is not going to complain. He's not going to complain. But she wasn't convinced. And she said, Bhante, but suppose I tried all the practices that you suggested and it doesn't work. What to do? How to manage? And just very quickly, this thing just came off my head, and I said, sing the happy birthday song. Happy birthday to you. And she was so shocked and surprised that I said that, she started laughing. And because she started laughing, you can imagine the nervousness, the fear went away. And she ended up having a very deep, peaceful meditation. And she was so happy and inspired that she was able to overcome this childhood fear. Because, as you said, the power of the imagination is very, very strong. And we're also deluded by our memories, especially unpleasant memories. Right? We can all relate to that. We all have unpleasant memories. Good memories, unpleasant memories. And as you know, you can remember something that happened a long time ago. And you can still get upset by that memory. Because there's just the nature of the mind. It's so powerful. Especially if you have a good memory. And sometimes you see that a good memory can be a blessing and it can also be a curse, right? You can still have anger over something that happened a long time ago. You can still have regret. You can still feel guilty about something. And those unpleasant memories, they can seem so solid, right? So permanent, so real. But when we apply awareness, present moment awareness, mindfulness, we begin to see that those memories, although they seem solid and permanent, but in fact, what they are as an actual experience in the present moment are only thoughts and images. Only thoughts and images that are happening now, in the present moment. That's all. Only thinking, thinking, thinking. And it's very liberating when we realize that. Of course, you cannot completely erase, all those unpleasant memories, unless you have Alzheimer's. But at least when they arise, we can deal with them skillfully. To know that they're only thoughts and images. And they are impermanent. You look at them and you let them go. And feeling guilty about something that happens, your mistake that you made, it's a universal problem, feeling guilty. And I know in the West, in North America, this is a big problem because people are so judgmental, right? They're so judgmental. And some people even have a lot of self-hate, But it's a form of delusion and ignorance, self-hate. Because not only are you judging others, but you're judging yourself. And this is why we have to learn to be kind, not only to others, but we have to learn to be kind to ourselves. Because sometimes it's easier to forgive others than to forgive ourselves, right? Because we take ourselves too seriously. We take ourselves too seriously, which is an aspect of ignorance. We're too attached to self. So really, it's not the self that is the suffering, but is the attachment to self. The strong self-view that I'm so important. And I'm at the center of the world and the universe. That's why sometimes it's good to have a bigger picture, a more cosmic view. And I found during the pandemic, some people found it very beneficial, to see the planet, be aware of the planet, what is happening, and then you zoom your mind out and to remind yourself that we're in a solar system, right? And we're evolving around the sun, and the sun is only one star of countless stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Sometimes it helps just to have a bigger picture, as we say. And to realize that, the solar system, by human scale, is so vast, isn't it? So vast by human size, human scale. And yet, it is just a speck of dust. Think of it. The solar system that is so vast by human scale is just a speck of dust inside the Milky Way galaxy. That's right. Just to give you some idea of how immense the galaxy is. Now in KL and Singapore, you won't have that opportunity to see the Milky Way galaxy, right? You have to go to somewhere where there's no light pollution. I think the best place in Malaysia is, what's it called, Negeri Sambalan, the park in Pahang State, right? And you can climb up. Lots of students go there camping on holidays, and you climb up the hill. I think there you can get a good view of the Milky Way galaxy. And I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to see the Milky Way galaxy on several nights, not just one night. where you could lie down and really expand your mind out into the galaxy. And of course, it's good to lie down, otherwise you strain your neck, right, when you look up. But when you lie down, you relax, and you can expand your mind out into the galaxy. I think one of the best places is Australia. Of course, you go outside the city, right? Outside the urban areas where all that light pollution, and there you get very, very clear skies of the stars and the Milky Way. You can almost touch the stars there. It's so clear. And it's dry, it's a dry atmosphere. And what is interesting too is that when you first see the Milky Way galaxy, it appears as a two-dimensional image, just flat. You just see it as a flat image. But when you relax your mind, and your mind becomes more spacious, open, because awareness by nature is spacious, right? For example, it is because of awareness that we're aware of the space in this room, right? And when you go outside, you can be aware of the space, like the sky, and so on. Now, of course, this area is more difficult because there are more buildings now. But, if you go to a park, you can experience that spaciousness. And initially, we don't see that space. We don't experience that space because we're busy thinking, right? All this compulsive chatter in the mind. And all the mental chatter takes up all the space in the mind. So the mind is quiet, the mind becomes more spacious. And of course, I'm sure if you've ever been on a retreat, you begin to experience this, huh? Especially after the first 3 days. Because, when you're living a very busy life, when you go to a long retreat, say 10 days, 2 weeks, it takes at least 3 days to really calm down and to appreciate the present moment. And you've locked away your smartphone. Actually, when you go on a retreat, you have to hand in your smartphone. And you can imagine part of the practice initially is to observe the craving to check your smartphone, right? I gotta check the messages. They're the most important thing in the world. And if I don't check them, the end of the world is going to come, right? That's the nature of attachment, right? The addiction, that's the nature of addiction. Very powerful delusion. It seems so important, right? But actually, most of it is not important. Yes, if you have, family emergency, that's another thing. But just your normal thing that you think is important is not really important. But it seems that way. That's the nature of anxiety and addiction. The goal in meditation, in mindfulness practice, is not to control your thoughts, your mental activity, but rather it is to stop letting them control you. When you think too much, you only create problems that are not there. Worries, fears, anxieties, imaginings, and so on. We train our mind to focus on the present moment and to let go of unnecessary and compulsive thinking. Nothing is permanent. Whatever arises in your mind is only impermanent, constantly changing. Just temporary mental states, changing conditions of the mind. Do not stress yourself out too much Because no matter how bad or unpleasant the situation is, it will change. I remember, when the pandemic first started, one of the first things that I thought about that, what I reflected on, this too shall pass. Although, it's a major global event, a very rare event, but it too will pass. Did any of you before the pandemic read or see a documentary on the previous pandemic? It was called the Spanish flu. There are documentaries about it on YouTube. Did any of you watch that documentary? I guess not. It was in 1918, 1918, and it lasted about 3 years too. The Spanish flu. I would suggest you watch it, because now you can relate to what a pandemic is. And it started towards the end of World War I. So you still had a lot of soldiers, going back and forth on ships. That's how it spread, the virus spread. Because in those days, you can imagine there were no international flights, right, like today. And even young soldiers, they were vulnerable to the virus, not just elderly people or people with certain health conditions. Even the young, strong, able-bodied soldiers were very vulnerable to that virus. And you can imagine in those days, medical science, medical facilities were very primitive, very limited. And they estimated, of course, they're not really sure how many people died. But an estimation is between 30 and 50 million people. 30 to 50 million people. So the numbers that you're hearing now, today, is very small, really, very small compared to those days. And of course, when you watch such a documentary, that seems such a long time ago, you can't imagine that something like that could happen again. Can't imagine. And then 2015, Bill Gates, Bill Gates, the famous Bill Gates, he gave a talk on TED, those TED Talks on YouTube. Have you seen that video? I would suggest you watch it. As education and reflection. He gave a talk on TED, 2015, where he was predicting another pandemic. Because, he knows a lot of experts, who study this type of thing. And they were giving him this information, and he gave this TED talk. Did anyone believe him? No. Absolutely no, right? Because you can't imagine something like this could happen again. Or you don't want to believe that it's possible, right? But now we know it is possible. But of course they're rare, every 100 years or so. And it is very, very likely that in another 100 years, or 80 years, 90 years, that there will be another global pandemic. These things happen. And if you ever read about European history, right? They have a long history of not global pandemics, but serious epidemics, where a lot of people died with very primitive, medical science. Do not stress yourself out too much, because no matter how bad or unpleasant the situation is, it will change. You cannot control everything. Sometimes you just have to relax, breathe and smile mindfully, and trust that things will work out. Let go a little and just let life happen. The planets are still revolving around the sun. And remember that the universe is unfolding as it should. The universe is unfolding as it should. Everything changes. And also, during an event like the pandemic, we had the opportunity to experience compassion, what compassion really means. To realize that what you're experiencing is not really a personal experience, the fear, the anxiety, worry, frustration, and so on, that everyone was experiencing this, or most people. In other words, it's a universal experience. That's an aspect of compassion, when you realize this, that you're not the only one. Even boredom, you're not the only one who experiences boredom, including our desires, our cravings. It's a universal experience, right? Fear, anxiety is a universal experience. And when we can bear this in mind, then compassion arises. And compassion gives us great strength to accept things that are beyond our control, great strength. Some people think compassion, you're so emotionally unstable, you're weak, some people have that idea, but that's not correct. Once I did some volunteer work in Calcutta. I think I mentioned this briefly yesterday, at the home of the dying destitute, sick and dying people. It was founded by Mother Teresa, the famous Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And I went there after she had won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I didn't get to meet her because, she was so busy and so on. But I really admired the people there, the other Roman Catholic sisters and volunteers and so on. And these people are found on the streets every day. They have an ambulance. They go around and they try to rescue some of these people. They're just very sick, just lying there. They have no friends, no family to take care of them. And in that Hindu tradition, they just say, past karma, past karma. That belief that, they're in that condition because in their past life they did bad things and now, they're paying for it. Karma ripen, as people like to say in Malaysia. That's how they deal with things like this. Or if somebody's on the street, even as a poor beggar, they will say, yes, in my past life, I did bad things and now, I'm living on the street, so I have to accept that. And hopefully I'll try to do good deeds, try to be a more decent human being so that in my next life, I will have a better rebirth, a better reincarnation. And for them, it helps, even to have this belief. It helps them to accept their, their present condition. And in my experience there, when you see people suffering, and most of it, of course, is physical suffering. They're very sick, they have these infections. Some of them actually recover, but some of them do pass away. But at least they have the the care, the human touch before they pass away. Because this place is not really to cure them, but it really, to help them in some way. And sometimes they do have some just basic medical treatment, but nothing major. And what I learned from that experience is that when you encounter so much suffering, naturally compassion arises. And when compassion arises, you not only have compassion for their suffering and their diseases and infections, but you have to have compassion for yourself also, for your limitations, because you can't do much. You're limited in what you can do. Because initially, especially, if you come from a modern developed country, you have the idea initially, very naive, that I'm going to come to Calcutta and I'm going to save all these people. I'm going to take them off the streets, put them in nice homes, give them TV, internet, nice makan, and so on. Because that is what you're used to. But when you go there, very quickly you realize it's all fantasy. So that's part of compassion and wisdom. You have to accept one's limitation. There's only so much you can do. And it gives you great strength to accept that. Your limitations and just, unlimited human suffering and sickness and disease. Great strength, you have to accept that. Because the ego is not there. That's one of the because the ego is there trying to achieve something, right? You're asking for a lot of, frustration, sorrow, sadness, self-blame, I'm not good enough. I'm not a saint. I'm not going to be a saint or an arahant. It gives you great strength to accept this unlimited suffering. And there's only so much you can do. And if you cannot help somebody today, tomorrow, I'll try and do something. It's like that acceptance. And naturally, when you see somebody suffering, in great pain and so on, great discomfort, you naturally want them to die. Yes. You naturally want them to die. Not that you want to kill them, but you simply want them to be free, to be free of suffering. Just like if you have a close relative, right? And they're really suffering, you want them to die, to let go of the body. But what is interesting, many people, experience this, which is something very natural in the human condition, but because of their own conditioning, usually in the West, because they are so judgmental and the ego is so strong, when they experience that, they begin to suffer from guilt. Oh, this is terrible, this is, bad. I shouldn't be wanting them to die. They judge it. They judge that natural compassion. I'm a murderer, I'm an evil person, I'm a bad person. I should want them to live, right? I should want them to live as long as possible. So then you have false hope. You know that saying? False hope. And this is why when I counsel families who are experiencing, a family member and they're dying, one of the things that I advise is that it's important that you allow the person to die in peace. You tell them that it's okay to die. Because what often happens is that family members, because of their emotional attachment, right? They plead with the dying person, please don't die, don't leave us like this. And when you do that to a dying person, what happens? They cannot die peacefully, right? Because they feel guilty, right? They feel guilty about leaving their family members. So it's very important. If you have somebody close to you that's dying, it's very important. None of this emotional attachment stuff. That's selfish craving, right? Selfish craving. But you see, we don't realize it at the time. Because we are so caught up in our emotional attachment. And we think that's love, right? We think that's love, but actually it's not love. It's just selfish craving and attachment. So true love comes with compassion, It's very important that you assure the person that it's okay to die. We love you. We're very thankful for all the things you have done. You know, we're proud of you, all your achievements, and all your wholesome deeds, and it's okay to die. We'll be okay. And you reassure the person, yeah, we'll be okay, we'll manage. And then the person can die in peace. That is wisdom and compassion. Not selfish craving and clinging. The world is in a very agitated state. The mind changes from liking to disliking, from craving to aversion, from anxiety to frustration, with the agitation, restlessness of the world. If we can learn to make the mind calm and peaceful, it would be the greatest help to the world. The mind changes from liking to disliking, from craving to aversion, from anxiety to frustration, with the agitation, restlessness of the world. If we can learn to make the mind calm and quiet, it will be the greatest help to the world. I'd like to read something that I wrote, because sometimes I do postings on Facebook. And when the pandemic started, first I was here, before lockdown, of course, and then I visited two Malaysian friends in Perth, Australia. And it was still very calm, you know, low risk, no lockdowns, schools were still open. This was in March. So I did this posting. This was my first posting when the pandemic started. During epidemics and pandemics, which have been affecting human civilization for many centuries, people will get infected and some people will die due to certain conditions. It is just the way things are. Birth, existence, and death are just parts of a process in a much vaster and timeless reality. Birth, existence, and death are just parts of a process in a much vaster and timeless reality. We might be better prepared than before, but our modern medical technology and facilities have their limitations when numbers get overwhelming. We can only try and do our best and be humble and learn to accept the fact of death, which no one can escape from. Death is 100% certain. An invisible virus is causing so much disruption and havoc around the world. Imagine an invisible virus. Human beings like to think that they know everything and that they have the answers for everything. And the news media hype and scare is making the situation worse, right? Creating more fear, anxiety, panic, and confusion. So this is indeed a good opportunity to meditate, to practice mindfulness, present moment awareness, to bring our attention to the present moment, to keep calm and reflect on the three facts of existence: constant change and impermanence, unsatisfactoriness and uncertainty, and the absence of a permanent, separate self. There is only this body-mind process, rupa nama, only earth, water, heat, air, and space. Only earth, water, heat, air, and space. And while we're alive, there's also the consciousness via the six senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and thinking. And at a deeper level of reality, reflection, they are atoms, otherwise known as cosmic energy, because everything is composed of atoms. And you may recall the first law of science. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change its form, and it can move from one place to another. This is the first law of science. And at this deep level of reflection, one is able to go beyond the idea of birth and death and find true inner peace and compassion. Compassion becomes real and meaningful when we recognize our shared humanity, our problems, challenges, and conflicts. It is compassion which gives us inner strength and peace to accept the things that are beyond our control. What we can control, however, is how we handle and respond to the current global situation. Mindfulness, present moment awareness, helps us to have a more stable base of presence and attention and clarity, so that we can be more calm and patient, kind, humble, and thankful during these times of uncertainty, frustration, confusion, and anxiety. We can learn to be at peace with ourselves, coming to terms with our basic aloneness, being simple and content with what we have, and not seeking temporary pleasure and happiness in shopping for new things. Appreciating family and friends, helping others when we can, and appreciating nature, the natural environment. Trees, birds, plants, flowers, in the present moment. Present moment, wonderful moment. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, I smile. Peace, calm. There is gratitude. Just being alive. The practice of gratitude can be very beneficial, especially when we're faced with this global crisis, or any crisis at all. the practice of gratitude. Because, as you know, we take so many things for granted, right? So many things, especially in a country like Malaysia or Singapore or in North America. Because it's so easy for minds to be pulled by, by unpleasant events, unpleasant traumatic events, very easy. But when we can bring our minds to the present moment and just practice gratitude, just to be thankful for just simple things. Because this helps us to uplift the mind, the nature of consciousness, to be more positive, as opposed to being, negative, worried, frustrated, and so on. Just to be thankful that you have water, for example, just water. And all this good food, all this variety of food you have. Because, in some countries, water is not taken for granted. Some people have to walk a long distance just to get, a container of water. And I've been in cultures where women, they would spend the whole morning just searching for firewood, so they can cook one meal for the family. Whereas, in our modern society, we just have to turn a knob, instant fire, right? Instant flame. We take so much for granted. But this practice of gratitude, not taking things for granted, it's very beneficial. When we're faced, with these challenges. Just to be thankful that we have a house, we have shelter, that we have good family, good friends. Be thankful that we have fairly good health. Because it's so easy when you're healthy, right, to take it for granted. So easy. And when you get stuck in the traffic, the KL traffic, breathe and smile. If you're feeling yourself getting impatient, right, frustrated, breathe and smile and be thankful that you have a car, you have a vehicle, Just be thankful. And just think about the traffic congestion in Jakarta. It's much, much worse than KL. And I experienced it 3-4 years ago. Because you're talking about between 16 and 17 million people just in Jakarta. So you can imagine how many vehicles. And if people can't afford a vehicle, they have a bike, a scooter. So there are countless scooters. And the traffic congestion, you should see them weaving through all this stranded traffic. But what impressed me so much about the people in Jakarta was how patient they were. Well, normally they're more relaxed. Just like when you go from Singapore to Malaysia, right? You realize how much more relaxed Malaysians are compared to Singaporeans. Well, you go to Jakarta or Indonesia, they're even more relaxed than KL. I guess like rural Malaysia would be like that. They're calm, they're patient, and they realize, common sense. They realize if you're not calm and patient, you go mad, right? So you might as well just be calm and patient and smile. Because it doesn't matter how angry you get when you shout and scream, and some people like to honk their horns and make a lot of noise. That doesn't help. It doesn't help how much you shout and scream and honk your horn. You're not going anywhere until, the traffic clears. I was really impressed by their patience. We call it common sense. And also, with this practice, this Dharma practice, we learn how to be. Just be, be, learning how to be. Maybe some of you are wondering, what are you talking about, learning how to be? It means just being calm and relaxed and just being comfortable in the present moment. Because you see, we're supposed to be human beings, right? But these days, very rarely, we are really human beings. But rather, we're human doings, right? You understand? I have to be always doing something, achieving something, right? I have to be busy. And if you don't have to work, I have to be buying something, shopping. North America, shopping is a big deal. There's an old saying, I think, therefore I am. Some people say, I shop, therefore I am. Shopping. That's the real meaning of life is to shop. Got to be shopping. And now I'm sure that attitude is the same here too. And in Singapore, of course, because you have so many shopping centers, so many things to buy, not enough time and not enough money. But the experience of being is very profound practice, just learning how to be. Because when you're busy, the present moment has very little meaning, right? Very little meaning. You got to do something. And if you're meditating, I got to achieve enlightenment, or I have to become, bodhisattva, or I have to become arahant. There are some practitioners, including monks, they have that anxiety and the fear, of course. This is my one opportunity. Now I'm a Bhante, I have to achieve enlightenment. I have to become arahant. So naturally with that craving, there's a fear of not achieving, right? The fear of not achieving enlightenment. But coming to that state of being, that quietness, that stillness, it is so peaceful and it is timeless. It's so beneficial when we can experience that state of timelessness. Because we're so governed by time, right? We're slaves to time. But really, there's no such thing as time, on the profound level. But we can experience it, but of course, we need, a quiet place. And most of our mentality, we call it becoming. In Dhamma practice, we say the craving to become, to achieve, to do, to have, to possess. We call it becoming. And with that becoming, we have the fear, the anxiety of not becoming. And most of our becomings, the craving to become, is related to the future. But there's one aspect of becoming that is related to the past. And that is, regret, when we talk about regret. I should have done that, why did I do that? I should have done that, etc., etc. And of course, if I only had thought about it before, right, things would be much better now. Oh, I'm so stupid, right? Why didn't I think of it before? Now I could be so successful. Maybe I could become a millionaire. Or if I'd started Dhamma practice, 10 years ago, I could become Arahant, or close to Arahant. You see that's an aspect of becoming, but it's related to the past. So when we learn just to be quiet, just to be, that state of just being, to be truly human beings, we're free from all this becoming, striving that's related to the future, and the becoming related to the past regrets, and so on. So in other words, the state of being, we're free from time, from future and past. And we experience that state of timelessness. And if you look at young children, that is what they're experiencing. Yeah, young children are in a timeless state. I remember when I was that age, every day was timeless. And you watch plants, animals, and trees, how still they are. Look at your dog and your cat. Unless they want food, they're in a timeless state, right? So that state of being, it's very liberating. That actually is an awakened state. Forget about becoming enlightened or becoming an arahant, just learning how to be. Yeah, you're free from time. And that striving, becoming, and the fear of not becoming, not achieving, and so on. Very peaceful. And in that timeless state, we're in touch with the timeless state of the universe, the timeless dimension of the universe. Because the universe is timeless. No beginning, no end. Always was and always will be. And the amazing thing is that when you experience this, you realize you're not separate from the universe, just like you're not separate from nature. It's only our thinking, right, gives us the illusion of duality and separation. We're actually aspects of the universe. In this temporary physical form, this body-mind process, being aware of itself. We are aspects of the universe in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. I try to share this when I'm in Singapore. Especially, being in such a small, high-stressed environment. It's good to go within and just find that calmness, that stillness, that timelessness. Very beneficial. Because as you know, time is a factor of fear, of anxiety and stress, right? Stress. And the faster we go, the more stress, anxiety we experience. And that's why there are unhealthy aspects to the smartphone. because it's so fast, it's so convenient, but it's making us more anxious, more impatient. So we don't value the virtue of patience anymore. But it's a great virtue, just like you had to experience, patient endurance, acceptance. And it is challenging, but in the end, it's very worthwhile to experience acceptance and patient endurance. And that's why looking at nature is so important. And when I was in Sri Lanka, I could watch the monkeys. Because what monkeys are teaching us humans is that they're in the present moment, and they're not worried about human problems. And corrupt politicians that are creating all these problems. Right? They don't care. And yet we are related to them. Genetically, we are very close to monkeys. Just like being in this horrific traffic jam in India, because the traffic congestion is getting worse and worse in India because now millions of people can afford cars, right? And the traffic jam is just, unbelievable. Sometimes even worse than Jakarta, because you have more people in India. And just to see the monkeys, on the rooftops and on the trees, just looking down on the human congestion. And they must be wondering, my goodness, these crazy humans and their vehicles, where are they going? What are they trying to do, right? It's a good reflection. So it's really good to use nature, to reflect on Dhamma. Very healthy. Now it's time for a mindful lunch. So of course, after lunch we can, if you have any questions, we can have an informal discussion after lunch. So of course, try to eat mindfully in silence. And as you know, when we eat mindfully in silence, it's very peaceful. And we can really appreciate the food, right? Because your focus is on eating, tasting, chewing, and so on. So we continue after lunch.